had a wonderful session this morning with Han Lee at the beach where I became a dolphin. It was incredible because we all came out of the waters originally, millions of years ago. We came out of the waters into the land, and we came with a lot of instincts in our system, ancient systems. For example, today I held my breath for 3.5 minutes. Wow, that was amazing. I never thought I could do that. But it was by activating this ancient mammalian diving reflex. And I immediately clicked on and said, well, that's what we do already when we're activating ancient healing programs that are in the body that are now in password-protected regions of our DNA. You know, how do we hack our biology to switch on these ancient, not repair systems, because the body is really good at repair, but regeneration systems? How do we turn those on? And I want to take us through a tour of this. But first, a little bit about my background. I'm a medical anthropologist by training. I've been on the faculty of the University of California and Columbia University in New York. But I started out as a poor graduate student in the Amazon many, many years ago, funded by big Swiss pharma. They wanted to discover the next breakthrough cancer cure or heart disease cure or Alzheimer's cure. And I was a poor graduate student, and they funded me in Swiss francs. So I was in bliss. And I ended up going to the backwaters of the Amazon, to places that they had never seen a light-skinned person before. And the kids would come running up to me and they'd rub my hands to see if the white dirt would rub off. And after many, many months in the backwaters of the Amazon, which is exquisite, by the way, I discovered that they didn't have any cancer. They didn't have any heart disease. They didn't have any Alzheimer's. In fact, we didn't have any Alzheimer's until Dr. Alzheimer's discovered it 100 years ago. They had none of the illnesses of civilization. So the Amazon is nature's pharmacy, and I came back empty-handed. And then I went up to the high mountains in the Andes to work with the shamans in the mountains, to learn how it was that they could, because at that time I was at San Francisco State University directing a laboratory. And it was a brain laboratory simply because we were located in the brain section. So this was the part of the biology lab that nobody wanted, and lab space is really hard to find. So I got the brain lab with 200 brains around me and the stench of formaldehyde. Now, the beauty of having 200 brains around you is that if you ever need a second opinion, you just need to reach over. And we were looking at how we could create psychosomatic health, because we knew we could create psychosomatic disease. We became experts at psychosomatic disease at the age of 6 when you didn't want to go to school that day. Remember, you could develop the symptoms of Ebola in 20 minutes, and the school bus would go by and you'd be ready to play again. But can we create psychosomatic health? And if so, how do we do it? Well, we closed our lab down. I had a research grant from big Swiss pharma to go into the Amazon and to work with the shamans, with the medicine men and women that did not have technology. They did not have MRIs. They relied on the ability of the mind to create health, to heal or to kill. And you can do both. So I want to take us through a little bit of that. So in the mountains, I got to meet and to work with a group of shamans who had never had any contact with the West. I was the first American anthropologist to work with this group that lived at 5,000 meters altitude. And they had migrated to these high mountaintops to be the keepers of a body of prophecy, of a prophecy that they called the Pachacuti, or the end of time, the end of days. They had prophesied 500 years before that there would come a time when the future of the planet, of Gaia, of Mother Earth, would be in our hands. And we would have to make the difficult choices of whether we elected the survival of our future generations or we elected our short-term pleasure. So they talked about the end of time, but they also spoke about the dawn of a new human, the end of the human species as we know it, and the birth of a new human that would be appearing on the planet today. So I want to speak to you a little bit about that. But for these shamans, these medicine men and women, the prophecy was not as important as the processes. How do you become that new human? How do we take that quantum leap? How do we grow a new body? How do we learn directly through wisdom and not through disease, which is how our immune system learns? You never get the same flu twice. How do we learn directly from wisdom? And this is, I loved Jim's talk yesterday on compassion. And this is one of the great teachings of Buddhism, is the practice of compassion, of alleviating suffering. The shamans have a slightly different practice. We want to alleviate suffering, but what we want to do is we want to learn directly from knowledge. In fact, the medicine men and women of the Americas believe that suffering is optional, that pain is inevitable. We have babies, we're born, we die, but suffering is optional. Suffering is what happens when you learn the hard way, which is the way that I've learned most of my life. So when you go to a shaman for healing, the first thing she will ask you is, what is the wisdom that you need to get? What's the lesson that the universe is offering for you? And until you realize what the teaching is, you cannot heal. If you don't realize, if you don't discover the lesson, you've got to keep repeating the grade. The same relationship with the next marriage, the same illness through a different set of symptoms. So what I discovered was that these men and women, these ancient pyramid builders, had a medicine that was based on the luminous energy field, on what we call the aura, the luminous energy field that surrounds the physical body and that organizes the body in the same way that a magnet organizes iron filings on a piece of glass. So I became a student of the shamans. And they would say to me, Alberto, you know, we've got to heal you first. I said, what do you mean heal me? I'm 28 years old. I'm in perfect health. He said, no, we got to heal your ignorance. I go, you know, I've got a PhD. It's Dr. Alberto to you. So we got to heal your ignorance, because I had a big collection of facts. And what the medicine people do is they differentiate between information and knowledge. Information is knowing that water is H2O. Knowledge or wisdom is being able to make it rain. Information is having a diagnosis. Knowledge is being able to heal. So this was the active practice of wisdom. And eventually I became a student of the shamans, and I became a shaman, not by choice, but if you cut wood for 20 years, you become a carpenter. And I did this for 25 years. So there was no heart disease, there was no cancer, there was no dementia, and I thought I was just lucky. But later, anthropologists discovered the same thing in the Amazon. How did these people protect their health? And I asked an old medicine man, how do I avoid these illnesses of old age? And they said, simple. If you want to avoid the illnesses of old age, just live a long and healthy life. I said, you don't understand. He said, no, I do understand. What they discovered is that they could clear the imprints, the information in the field. This is what we call in science today the quantum field. It's an information field. You can clear the imprints in the field that predispose you to disease. And these imprints are always connected to trauma. And not only the trauma that you experienced, but the generational trauma. The stories that run in your family, the toxic stories, the terrible stories that we all have, that we've all inherited. Now, that was the Amazon, but look at our statistics. Our statistics are that if you live to be 85 years old, and you will, all of us here will live to be 100. If you live to be 85, you will have a 50% probability of having diagnosticable Alzheimer's. Diagnosable Alzheimer's. This is not forgetting where your car keys are. This is forgetting your children's names. Look around the room. One of every two of us. And of course we go, that's not going to happen to me. But these are the statistics. So today, I want to invite you to, you all know the bell curve, which is that says that 2% of the population will have incredible health. They're not going to get Alzheimer's. 8% they're going to have really bad health their whole lives. And the big bulge here, the part where the snake ate the hat, is going to be the average. And that average is 1 out of 2 people. If you live to be 90, your probability are 75% that your brain will be so damaged that you will have diagnosable Alzheimer's. So I want to invite you to be part of an experiment. When we do an experiment in medicine or in science, N equals the number of people in the study. And the more people in the study, the more valid that the research is. But today we have to do an experiment where N is equal to 1. My experiment is called Alberto. And what happens if you don't do the experiment, guess what happens? You get to be part of the control group. And the control group is the statistics. And they're not pretty today. So we have to take part in this experiment. But this is not an experiment that's unique to us. It's an experiment that is happening at this time in evolution that all of nature is participating in. And I want to share with you what that experiment is. It's an experiment in consciousness. It's an experiment in intelligence. Because nature prefers brains over muscle and teeth and speed and force. She prefers brains, prefers intelligence over brawn. You know, there are about 40 million species in the planet. 40 million different species in the planet. And there are only 2 species in which the female is allowed to live into menopause. The other 39.99 million species, the female is killed off when she's no longer reproductively viable. But humans and orcas and dolphins, and today this morning I loved that experience with Hanli where I became a dolphin. We have very similar brains. We have the 2 biggest brain to body weight ratios in all of nature, of complexity of the brain. Only 2 species is the female allowed to live beyond into menopause because they're the wisdom keepers. It's the grandmothers of the orcas that teach the young how to speak, how to communicate, how to hunt in times of scarcity. It's our grandmothers that used to teach us how to do that. Only 2 species with the most complex brains. Now, we're not doing such a good job of our intelligence. They're doing a much better job. Humans and orcas, the 2 most intelligent species. So intelligence is what we call consciousness or spirituality, not religion, exploration, discovery. And this is what nature is selecting for. But you cannot take part in that experiment if your brain is broken. If your brain is broken, you know, you are on the fast track to dementia, to Alzheimer's, to Parkinson's. So we have to repair and to upgrade the brain because all of us have been affected by the pesticides, by the toxins in the water and the food that we eat and the air that we breathe. And look at the amount of this is not a commercial for underwear, but look at the amount of toxins in deodorant. Deodorant has, the body can eliminate 20 milligrams of aluminum per day. But if you have 60 milligrams in an antacid tablet or in your deodorant, you're going to build up those toxins. And the body is very wise. It stores toxins in fat because these are the most stable and long-lived molecules. And the brain is 70% fat. So we cannot take part in that experiment if our brain is toxic. You know, we have to detoxify. Now, I'm going to take you back to how the experiment unfolds. There's no death program in our DNA. There's only a growth program. We're not programmed for getting old, for senescence, or for death. There's no death program in our DNA. The shamans of old discovered also that there's no death program in the information field, in the luminous energy field. We're programmed for immortality. What keeps us from experiencing that is, among other things, the toxins in our brain. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can repair and upgrade the brain. But here is and keep in mind that you will live to be 100 years old. I exercise every day and I'm working out for a half marathon. But when I'm 100, I'm going to be working out to be able to tie my shoelaces. So the battle that we've been engaging in is the one between cellular damage and cellular repair. If you could repair damage as quickly as it happens, you would not die. So how do we trigger the repair mechanisms? But even more than repair, how do we trigger the regeneration mechanisms that are in password-protected regions in our DNA? Well, the shamans of old said that you do that by the practice of spirituality, by accessing higher order regions in the brain where we can experience oneness, compassion, connection with each other, our interconnection with all of nature. So you grow a new body every 7 years. You already do that. So there's no one really in the planet that's older than 7 years old. So you get new skin every 6 days. That expensive rub that you have is to get the old dead skin cells out so the new cells can flourish. The lining in your lungs is replaced every 3 days. You get new bones every 7 years. So if we look at the luminous energy field as an information field, the quantum field that has information that informs the body, that in effect is the software, how do we upgrade the software? How do we download version 7.1 of human to grow a new body, to become that new human that the prophecies speak about, the prophecies of the shamans of the Americas? Well, we know how to do that today. So this is Dolly. Do you remember Dolly, 1996? The first creature that was cloned, cost $5 million. And this is Barbara. Dolly and it's the right, Barbara is below Barbara Streisand. When Barbara's dogs got really, really old and sickly, she had them cloned. $28,000 is what it costs to clone a dog today. So when Barbara cloned her dogs, they were really old. They were really sick. So did she get old and sick clones? No, she got puppies. That information is encoded in your DNA. It's encoded in our DNA. But how do we access that information? We don't want to clone ourselves. I don't think my wife could stand two of me. She has a hard enough time with one. How do we activate that information? How do we switch it on so that that becomes the dominant source in our growing and renewing our body? Well, we know how to do that today. So imagine if you could prevent disease. If you did not have to treat cancer or dementia, which we cannot treat, unfortunately. And remember that in the West, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a disease care system. And I loved hearing the presentation before mine of how women have been completely neglected and abused by the system. You know, in America, in the United States, hysterectomies is the third most common surgical procedure. And they'll say to a woman, you know, you really don't need those sexual organs anymore. You've had your kids. You've never heard a surgeon say to a guy, you know, you don't need those testicles anymore. You've already had your babies. So none of the medications that we use have been tested on women. It's been an ongoing abuse of the feminine, really, which is the mythology and the culture that we have been raised in. But imagine if we did not have to treat disease. If we could switch on the genes that create health and switch off the genes that create heart disease and breast cancer and dementia. Today we know how to do this. Dean Ornish at UC Medical Center in San Francisco has done the research. He's discovered that a plant-based diet, a primarily plant-based diet, calorie-poor, nutrient-rich, will flip all of those switches to create health. Now, when I was in the Amazon, before you take part in any ceremony, you would have to do a dieta or a diet or a cleanse. And I would ask them, why do I have to drink this horrible bark from this tree? It is disgusting. And they say to me, well, you have to drink it because it's always been done that way. And I was raised in science and trained in science, so I decided to take it to the laboratory. What was this disgusting thing that I was drinking? And we found out that that the plants that were sacred to the shamans, not the psychedelic ones, those were the teacher plants, but the sacred plants were the ones that turned on your longevity genes, what I call the immortality genes. They knew the plants that flipped these genetic switches. And I asked them, how did you know what plants did this? And they said, well, the plants told us. Stupid. So, well, do you talk to the plants? Yeah, we talk to the plants, we talk to nature, we talk to God. And it reminds me of a story when the conquistadors arrived in Peru. The priest came to meet with the Inca, and he gave him the Bible and said, this is the word of God. And the Inca took the Bible and put it to his ear and listened, and he threw it on the ground and said, what kind of God is this that does not speak? And he asked the priest, when did your God last speak to you? And it was the year 1500. He said, about 1,500 years ago. When did your God last speak to you? This morning at breakfast. So this is a wisdom teaching from a feminine tradition, a pre-religious tradition. And in fact, in the shamanic traditions, the concept of God is not very big. There's, among the Aborigines in Australia, for example, there is creation and there is creating. But there's not this whole concept of creator that you have to pay homage to and make blood sacrifice to or send your children off to war for. There's creation and creating. Creating is participating in creation. In the Andes, they call this dreaming the world into being, knowing that you can dream the world and your health into being. So imagine if we could work. Now, in science, we call this epigenetics. Switching on the genes that create health is epigenetics. This is what the shamans of old discovered, that you could upgrade the quality, the luminous energy field that would upgrade the quality of your health. So we know how to do that a little bit too, so we can do it now through pharma. Pharma has identified a couple of products, including rapamycin, metformin. Rapamycin was an antibiotic discovered in Rapa Nui an Easter island off the coast of Chile, where I live. And I don't live in Easter Island, but I live in Chile half of the year. And they discovered that it was extraordinary for inhibiting the immune system, and it was fantastic for organ transplants. When you do an organ transplant, you want to do it very carefully so you don't have any cancer cells piggybacking along. The people that received rapamycin, not only did they not get any cancer, they did not get dementia, they didn't have any heart disease, and no kind of cancer whatsoever. So what they found is that it upregulated these two pathways that switch on regeneration and prevent all of these conditions. NRF2 is really at the key. All of the shamanic medicines that are the sacred plants were upregulators of what I call the shaman's pathway, NRF2. And I'll show you how it works in a second. In nature, you can do that through broccoli sprouts. 6-day-old broccoli sprouts are full of NRF2 activators that flip on all of the genetic switches that create health and inhibit disease. So you can do this right in your own home. You can grow your own broccoli sprouts. You cannot buy this in a tablet or in a pill because it needs to be the fresh plant. It doesn't have myrosinase, which is the enzyme that activates the sulforaphane. So the ancient wisdom keepers had a science, and they had a science that was based on the invisible world, not the world of matter and atoms and molecules like our science, but the relationship with energy, with your field, with what we call today the quantum field. And 100 years ago, the big conversation in physics was whether the electron was a particle or if it was a wave. Is it a particle? If you shot it at a target with a single hole in it, it would go through that hole like a bullet. If you shot it at a target that had 3 slits in it, it would go through all 3 of them at the same time like a wave, like an ocean wave. And of course, they discovered that it was both. It was a particle and a wave. It had a particle state and a field state. And then Heisenberg came along and said, well, you're going to find that electron wherever you look for it. Wherever you look for it is where the field collapses and it becomes a particle. We have a particle state, which is this, but we also have a field state. And once I asked an old medicine woman, what's the object of all of this shamanic teaching? I had to go through a lot of training, and they said, well, the object of all of this training is to learn how to get out of this life alive. I said, oh, that sounds interesting. Sign me up for that. How do we take our consciousness with us when we leave our particle state behind and go into the field state? So I was in Kathmandu in Nepal a couple of years ago. My wife and I were there. We're going off on a medical expedition with a group of Buddhists into Mustang, way into the back of Nepal. And a friend of ours is a Buddhist scholar, a Lama, and we invited him to have lunch with us at the Hyatt Hotel in Kathmandu. Beautiful hotel. And with a huge buffet, Japanese, Chinese, and all exquisite buffet, and magnificent gardens. And we invited this Lama in the monastery. They don't eat that well, so he was really happy to have lunch with us. And he says a prayer and a blessing. So we close our eyes, and he says, to the Buddhas of all time, we offer this food to the Buddhas of all time, to the luminous ones that have come before us and will come after us. To the hungry ghosts that have not eaten today, we offer you this food. To the demons in the demon realms, we offer you this food as well. So I asked the Lama, where are these hungry ghosts? And he's eating, he's got his chopsticks in his hands, and he says they're everywhere. And he points to the pulled pork section, and he's a vegetarian. So I go, of course, the hungry ghosts have to be in the meat section. And I ask him, what about the demons? Where are these demons? And he points to the dessert table. I go, sugar. Sugar is the fast track to dementia. Of course, these demons are up in the dessert table and the sugar. And when I'm looking over there, I see there's this beautiful 3-layer chocolate cake. So we were sitting outside in the gardens, and there was a plate glass window, and inside there was an American couple, big guy. And when I'm coming back from the dessert table with my chocolate cake, this big guy is outside yelling at the monk and my wife. And he's saying, you damn skinhead, you're blocking my view. Get out of my view. And the monk is saying, oh, so sorry, we move. And my wife can go from beneficent goddess to wrathful deity in 10 seconds flat. And this is a nice hotel, and they have very heavyweight cutlery. So she's standing up. She's got a big fork in her hand. Her arm is cocked. And I'm feeling bad for this guy already. His wife is pulling him away, and he leaves, and the monk is saying, we moved. My wife said, we're not moving. They're moving. So I sit down and I said, see, this is your fault. When I'm buying lunch, you don't invite the demons and the hungry ghosts. When you're buying lunch, you can invite whoever you want for lunch. But the lesson for me was that there was a teaching there. When you're with a Lama, there's always a teaching and whatever happens. And the teaching for me was that this is the quality of the field. The quantum field is everywhere. If I were to want to sit in that chair where the three of you are sitting, you would not be very happy because you're already taking up. So two physical objects cannot occupy the same space, but two fields can. You can have 10 magnets on your refrigerator, and their electromagnetic field can be one intertwined with the other, discretely unique, but occupying the same space. And this is what happens when we journey beyond death. We enter our field state that's everywhere, extends out to the farthest reaches of the cosmos. And for the shamans, the question became, how do you take your consciousness with you when you return to your field state? Well, you were not able to discover that until you upgraded the brain. But here's the science with the NRF2, with the shaman's pathway. The NRF2 is a protein that's actually on the cell membrane, outside the nucleus. And when you dislodge it from the cell membrane with sulforaphane or with green tea extract, with garlic, or caloric restriction, intermittent fasting will do that too. You get all of these benefits: antioxidants, anti-stress, anti-inflammation. It knocks NRF2 down into the nucleus, and then it begins to flip switches, flipping the genetic switches for health. And this is what occurs. You get the birth of new mitochondria, the fuel factories in your cells. BAX, which is what regulates cell death, is downregulated, so you live longer, you don't grow old that quickly. It turns on the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors. This is what produces stem cells in your brain. Now, when I went to college, we believed the brain did not repair, so that every glass of tequila that we had was 25,000 neurons. And we kind of budgeted our drinking around that. But today we know that the brain repairs itself, that you can switch on the production of neural stem cells. The brain produces stem cells. And we've discovered that every organ in the body does this well. But most important is you turn on the SIRT genes. These are the immortality genes. These are the longevity genes. So we don't have to treat disease anymore. We can prevent it. We know the genetic upregulators that'll do this. It's pretty much impossible, very difficult to treat dementias. If you have an elderly parent or friend that has Alzheimer's, you know how terrible that process is. There's no treatment for it. But we know how to prevent it. We could prevent it with the food we eat, with the supplements you take. If you take omega-3s, omega-3 fatty acids that the body does not produce naturally, that has two components, DHA and EPA, if you take 2 grams of DHA a day, you reduce your risk for Alzheimer's by 85%. Incredible. If you take vitamin D3, 5,000 units of D3, who takes their D3 every day? All right, excellent. People ask me, well, can't you get enough vitamin D from the sun? I say, yes, absolutely, if you work as a lifeguard. Otherwise, you need to supplement. Breast milk is 40% DHA because the brain needs it to repair and to upgrade. So I tell my students, unless you have a friend who is lactating, you need to supplement. Because we don't get DHA in our food anymore. We used to get it from fish, and today our fish is all farm-raised, has 0 DHA in it. These are the things that repair and upgrade the brain that we need to do in order to be part of the experiment in intelligence that we talked about a little bit earlier. So I have to apologize for this slide. I was just teaching in Germany, and they made me take my sexy slide out. But the idea is this, that nature has programmed us for reproduction, not for longevity. She programs the species for longevity, and that means that we're programmed for reproduction, which is why we're so fascinated by sex. But then this is what happens, right? So we're programmed for reproduction, and that's why every other female in the wild is eliminated when she's no longer reproductively viable. The male lives longer than the female in nature, in the wild. In captivity, we guys live a little bit less than the women do. But what happens is that at the age of 35, all of your repair systems, the growth hormones, glutathione levels, they begin to shut down because you're no longer reproductively of interest to biology. But we know how we can turn these systems back on again today. We know how to do that. We have the science and we have the ancient wisdom. And this is the NRF2 activators that do this. So this is what the prophecy spoke about. The prophecy of the wisdom keepers of old said that there's a new human being born, not sapiens any longer, but luminous humans. That we're in the middle of a quantum leap. Now, let me tell you a little bit about biology. Well, here's just some of the bad news. You know that many of the large species of mammals are disappearing. And I remember driving through Tuscany, the Toscana, 20 years ago at sunset in late summer, and you had to get out every half hour to clear the windscreen from all the bugs. And today you drive through and there's no bugs. There's an extinction. We're in the middle of an extinction event that's happening globally. Now, this is the 5th extinction event in the history of this planet. There have been 4 previous ones, and this one is man-made. Now, the way that evolution works is evolution works incrementally, slowly acquiring new traits and skills that you hope will be passed on to your children from one generation to the next, except during extinction events. During extinction events is no longer incremental evolution, but it becomes quantum evolution. Biologists call it quantum speciation, where new species appear very rapidly, where the DNA code unfolds another strand and you're able to exhibit a new trait within generations. No longer in between generations, but within generations. So it's not our children and their children that are going to take this leap. It's you and I. Because Mother Nature, Gaia, takes her foot off of the brake and steps on the accelerator. We can become that new human within our generation. We can take that quantum leap. And we do it by upgrading the luminous energy field, the information field. Remember, the field stores trauma. And that is not only your trauma, but what we have inherited. Many of us are the children and grandchildren of war. And we inherit those stories that are encoded epigenetically, encoded in our field and in our body. So we upgrade the quality of the field. This is from the Dalai Lama's secret temple in Lhasa. And it shows this 8th chakra. That's this energy center that is outside the physical body, but within the luminous energy field. So these technologies are not unique to the shamans. They're unique to shamans worldwide. To shamans that lived in a time when it was the goddess that you prayed to. The shamans that lived before agriculture, before religion appears. Remember that the spiritual traditions are about experience, whereas the religious traditions are about belief. What do you believe in? The shamanic traditions are pre-religious. This is the time when the goddess was honored and celebrated. And then 6,000 years ago, we had 3 things happen. Agriculture and the discovery of grains, including gluten. We had the discovery of religion, the invention of religion, and the grains make their way into the religion. I remember as a child learning the Lord's Prayer. You know the Lord's Prayer in English is, Our Father who art in heaven, give us this day our daily fats and proteins, right? You know, we have wheat already embedded, and if you go to Asia, you find that there's rice being offered to the Buddha. In the Americas is the corn. We change our diet, we become dumber, our lifespans are reduced tremendously. And of course, it becomes the tyranny of the masculine in medicine, in society, and we're breaking out of that today. You know, we've come to the end of that masculine paradigm where, you know what cancer treatment is about? Cancer treatment is about killing it, burning it, or cutting it. I mean, this is what you do when you're in siege, right? In war. It's a war against cancer. So we're coming to the end of this paradigm. It's exhausting itself economically, and our sustainability is totally unsustainable. A new paradigm in health and in medicine is emerging where we're leaving the paradigm of sick care to that of creating health. And the understanding today, as we're marrying this ancient wisdom with contemporary brain science, is that if you can create the conditions for health, disease goes away. You don't need to treat it. If you treat disease, you're not treating the person any longer. Disease goes away when you create the conditions for health, emotionally, energetically, nutritionally. And this is what we are in the process of birthing. So it starts with the brain. It starts with taking part in that extraordinary experiment in intelligence. In awakening a brain, I want to take us quickly through on a tour of the 4 brains that we have. We have 4 evolutionarily different brains inside of our skull. The first one is the reptilian brain that we share with the reptiles. And this is at the brain stem, the very, very base of our skull. And this brain is in charge of housekeeping, body temperature, breathing. Breathing is an autonomic function for us, so that we don't have to breathe. We don't have to, you cannot commit suicide by holding your breath. Let's try it, everybody. Deep breath. It doesn't work. It's an autonomic function. Dolphins, on the other hand, are not Mother Nature is having a different experiment with the dolphins. Remember, they have brains as complex as ours. The dolphin is not programmed for automatic breathing. The dolphin has to go, that felt really good. I think I'll try another one. And that's why only half of the dolphin brain sleeps at any one time, because the other half continues breathing. On top of that, you have the mammalian brain that we share with all the mammals. This is the brain of the emotions. This is where you have the amygdala, the fight or flight system. And this brain has 4 programs. And that's fear, feeding is scarcity, not having enough. I remember one of my wealthiest clients was also one of the most impoverished because he never had enough. Never had enough love, enough time, enough money. And he was 84 years old. And he wasn't talking to his family. And he was worth $800 million. He'd love to tell me that. I said, what are you going to do? You've got to start helping the world with this. This is energy. You've got to start first treating yourself well and then making a difference in the world. But he never had enough. He was totally impoverished. That brain was damaged. Now, this brain runs on sugar. This is a sugar brain that lives in fear, that never has enough, that needs enemies, conflict, fighting, and that is predatory. The higher brain, which is the neocortex, is a brand new brain that became active about 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago, there was this huge leap in human intelligence. The biologists call it the Great Leap Forward. Technologies that had not changed in 1 million years changed in 3 generations. You have hunting technologies that appear. You have fishing hooks, sewing needles, and art. The great art in the cave paintings at Altamira, Lascaux. 3 or 4 generations that coincide when we move to the shorelines, climate change, move to the coast, and we begin eating mollusks that are rich in DHA. Switches on the higher brain. This higher brain runs on fat, loves the fats, loves the coconut oil, loves the avocado, loves the olive oil, loves the MCT oils. And in fact, it runs on the ketones. So when you do a ketogenic diet, you're feeding this brain. And it requires the ketones to wake up, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate is one of the ketones, jet fuel for this brain. And suddenly, you understand that we're all connected. Then you don't have to try to meditate because you're producing the brain chemicals that facilitate meditation. The lower brain is for fight or flight. Remember the fight or flight system? Several of our speakers have talked about it. The fight or flight system produces adrenaline and cortisol hormones, the stress hormones, the fighting hormones, the running hormones. You need cortisol to run away from the tiger. And the problem with the fight or flight system is that it's a feed-forward system. It's not a feedback system. Feedback systems tell you to stop when you've had enough. The fight or flight system, the more cortisol and the more adrenaline you produce, the more you damage the hippocampus, which is rich in cortisol receptors, and the more that it triggers the production of cortisol and adrenaline until you're living in a cortisol martini. And your hippocampus is damaged. And the hippocampus is the region in the brain where learning happens. It's where you're able to wake up with your spouse that you've been married to for 20 years and go, wow, who is this person I'm waking up with? Fantastic. If it's damaged, you go, who is this person in my bed? Get them out of here. So you're not able to have a new experience. Learning stops. You're caught in the mammalian brain, sugar brain. You're not able to step up to this brain, which is the brain of Bach, of Einstein, of science, of creativity. And here's the substrate underneath it. If your brain is producing the stress molecules, cortisol and adrenaline, you cannot meditate. You need the chemical substrate in order to meditate. You're going to want to check your email. If you can silence the production of adrenaline and cortisol, then your higher brain, your pineal gland, begins to transform serotonin. The pineal gland makes melatonin so you can sleep. Serotonin is ubiquitous. It's everywhere in nature. Trees have it, whales have it, grasshoppers have it. Serotonin, and stay with me for a moment because I'm going to get into a little bit of the science. Serotonin is 5-HT, 5-hydroxy water tryptamine. It's a tryptamine. And it's produced by the gut. 85% of your serotonin comes from your gut. If your gut is broken because you've had antibiotics recently, you're not producing serotonin, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter. 5-hydroxytryptamine, when you're not producing the stress molecules, cortisol and adrenaline, the brain will begin to add to methylate, to add methyl bonds, methyl groups to this tryptamine, and you end up with di-2-methyltryptamine. What's dimethyltryptamine? DMT? Ayahuasca. Have you heard of ayahuasca, the most powerful psychedelic in the world? The brain produces it naturally, but you need to access the higher brain. And then people ask me, Alberto, do you meditate? I say, yeah. When do you meditate? I say, well, I'm up to about 23 hours a day. Because when this higher brain is functioning, you're producing the substrate, you're always meditating. That's the only thing you do. But we need to have the brain chemistry to be able to support that. We need to begin to let the pineal gland methylate serotonin. Now, there's evidence that fluoride that they put in the drinking water of every country in the world, the Swiss took it off 2 years ago, will crystallize the pineal gland so that it's unable to function. It's unable to get you into these states of communion and of oneness, which the brain that we're wired to. We're wired for bliss. We're wired for this experience of communion and transcendence. But of course, we need the basic substrate. And then you can ask the 3 most important questions that a shaman or any one of us can ask. Who am I? Where do I come from? And where am I going? You can only truly explore these questions from this higher brain, from the prefrontal lobes and from the neocortex, with the right brain chemistry supporting it. Otherwise, you have to get to settle for the answers that religion gave to us or the science is giving us. Science says, religion says, who am I? You came from, and this is where you're going. You're going to hell if you don't behave this way. Science says that you are this complex of molecules and that you came from your mother and your father and you're not going anywhere. But these are the questions that every great tradition has encouraged us to ask. And you can only ask them from this higher brain. It's from this higher brain that you can create psychosomatic health, because you're no longer creating psychosomatic disease from the stress molecules. From this higher brain, you can take part actively in that experiment in intelligence that is happening today, particularly during this time of an extinction event that we're living in, when Gaia, Mother Earth, has taken her foot off of the accelerator and where we can quantum leap into who we are becoming 10,000 years from today. So I was having dinner with some friends that teach at Harvard, and they were saying to me, Alberto, you read the latest research on probiotics. Who takes our probiotics here? Really important. And they said they shows that probiotics don't work. Take them in through your mouth and they come out the other end. I go, bad experimental design. They go, what do you mean by bad design? This is Harvard. I said, yeah, bad design. I said, we're having a glass of wine or two. I said, yeah, because, you know, the mind of Gaia, the mind of the planet, is bacterial. They've been here for 2,000 million years. They speak with each other. Now, your probiotics, just a cue for those of you who take it daily, put them in water for 5 minutes, warm water so they can rehydrate. Otherwise, they try to rehydrate in your stomach, which is full of acid. So I say to them, you know, the mind of Gaia is bacterial. So you've got to take your probiotics, and Gaia knows that we're killing her, that we're a parasite, literally, humans. You've got to take your probiotics and you've got to talk to them. And they're pouring more wine for me. They think so you got to talk to them. You got to tell them, look, I know that we're a plague here on the earth, but I'm part of the solution. I'm part of the solution. I'm not part of the problem. If they think you're part of the problem, your probiotics might try to do away with you. I'm part of the solution. And then they'll help you. They're conscious. You can speak to Gaia. You can find that voice of the divine when you activate the higher order neural networks in the neocortex. You can speak with God. You can talk to the rivers and to the trees and your probiotics. Talk to them. It's important that they know that you're part of the solution so that they can truly work on your behalf, and we can become that new human that we've been waiting for, that is us. Thank you very much.